World War I. The American Cemetery at Rheinsummenfochen. As World War I raged in Europe from 1914, President Woodrow Wilson took complete control of foreign policy. He declared neutrality, but warned Germany that continued unrestricted submarine warfare against American shipping supplying the Allies would mean war. Germany decided to take the risk and seek victory by cutting off supplies to Britain. The United States declared war in April 1917, 105. American money, food, and ammunition arrived quickly, but troops had to be recruited and trained. By the summer of 1918, American troops under General John J. Pershing were arriving at a rate of 10,000 a day, while Germany could not replace the dead, 106. The result was an Allied victory in November 1918. President Wilson demanded that Germany depose the Kaiser and accept his terms, known as the 14 Points. Wilson dominated the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, but Germany was severely dealt with by the Allies in the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, as Wilson placed his hopes on the newly formed League of Nations. Wilson refused to compromise with Republican senators on the issue of the U.S. Congress's power to declare war. As a result, the U.S. Senate rejected the treaty and the League of Nations. 7. Women's suffrage. Alice Paul wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, but it was not ratified and became an unfulfilled goal of the feminist movement of the 1970s. The women's suffrage movement began with the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. The convention produced the Declaration of Sentiments, which called for equal rights for women. Many activists became politically active during the abolitionist movement. The first wave women's suffrage campaign was led by Mott, Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, among others. The movement reorganized after the Civil War, adding more experienced activists. Many of these worked hard to promote prohibition of alcohol. By the end of the 19th century, only a few Western states granted women full suffrage, 108, although women had won significant legal victories in areas such as real estate and child custody, 109. Around 1912, the women's rights movement, which had previously been inactive, began to reawaken, emphasizing its demand for equal rights and arguing that the American political bureaucracy needed to be cleansed by women because men could not do it. Protests began to grow in popularity when suffragist Alice Paul led marches through the capital and major cities. Paul broke away from the National Woman Suffrage Association, NASA, which favored a more moderate, pro-Democrat and pro-Woodrow president led by Carrie Chapman Catt. Paul founded the more militant National Woman Suffrage Association. Suffragists were arrested for erecting silent watchman signs at the White House, the first time such tactics had been used, and those arrested became political prisoners. The argument of opponents of women's suffrage that only men could fight in a war and therefore only men should have the right to vote, was rejected by tens of thousands of American women on the home front during World War I. Throughout the world, permissive states allowed women to vote. Moreover, most Western states granted women the right to vote in national and state elections. Representatives from these states, including the first woman, Jeanette Rankin of Montana, demonstrated that women's suffrage was a success. The main opposition came from the South, where white leaders feared the threat posed by black women voters. Congress passed the 19th Amendment in 1919, and women could vote in 1920. NASA became the League of Women Voters, and the National Women's League began lobbying for equal rights and the Equal Rights Amendment. The amendment passed Congress during the second wave of the women's movement in 1972, but it expired without being ratified by all the states. Politicians responded to the demands of the new Electoral College by focusing on issues of particular concern to women, especially prohibition, child health, and world peace. 114. The climax of women's suffrage came in 1928 when political machines in major cities realized they needed women's support to elect Al Smith, a Catholic from New York City. Meanwhile, Protestants rallied women to support prohibition and elected Republican Herbert Hoover. 115. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. See also the Great Depression and the New Deal. Prohibition agents burning barrels of liquor in Chicago, 1921. In the 1920s, the United States steadily grew in stature as a world military and economic power. The United States Senate ratified the Treaty of Versailles, which the Allies had imposed on the defeated Central Powers. Instead, the United States chose to pursue a unilateral policy 116. The aftermath of the October Revolution brought real fears of communism in the United States, leading to the Red Menace and the deportation of foreigners suspected of subversive intentions. Despite the rapid development of public health facilities during the Progressive Era and the modernization of hospitals and medical schools 117, the United States lost an estimated 675,000 lives in 1918 to the Spanish flu 118. In 1920, the manufacture, sale, importation, and exportation of alcohol were banned by the 18th Amendment and Prohibition. As a result, bootlegging became a major business in the cities, largely controlled by bootleggers. A second wave of the KKK grew rapidly between 1922 and 1925, then collapsed. Immigration laws were passed to limit the number of newcomers. The 1920s were called the Roaring Twenties because of the great economic prosperity of the period. Jazz music became popular among the younger generation, and the decade is also known as the Jazz Age. Journalist-photographer Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother depicts the plight of California pea pickers, focusing on Florence Owens Thompson, a 32-year-old mother of 7 in Nipomo, California in March 1936. The Great Depression, 1929-39, and the New Deal, 1933-36, were defining moments in American social, economic, and political history that reshaped America. During the 1920s, the United States enjoyed widespread prosperity, despite agricultural weakness. A financial bubble was inflated by an inflated stock market that eventually led to the stock market crash of October 29, 1929, 120. This, along with many other economic factors, sparked a global economic crisis known as the Great Depression. During this period, the United States experienced deflation, with falling prices, unemployment rising from 3% in 1929 to 25% in 1933, agricultural prices falling by half, and manufacturing output falling by a third. In 1932, Democratic presidential candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt promised a New Deal for the American people. This became the enduring label for his domestic policies. The desperate economic situation, combined with the Democratic Party's significant victories in the 1932 elections, allowed Roosevelt to wield extraordinary influence over the United States Congress during the first 100 days of his presidency. He used his influence to quickly pass a series of measures to create welfare programs and impose regulations on banking, the stock market, industry, and agriculture, among other government efforts to end the Great Depression and reform the American economy. The New Deal imposed many regulations on the economy, especially the financial sector. It provided relief to the unemployed through numerous programs such as the Public Works Progress Administration, WPA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Large-scale spending projects designed to provide high-paying jobs and build infrastructure fell under the purview of the WPA. Roosevelt turned left in 1935-36, forming unions with the Wagner Act. Unions became a strong element of the emerging New Deal coalition. This coalition helped President Roosevelt win re-election in 1936, 1940, and 1944 by mobilizing union members, working-class workers, welfare recipients, urban political machines, racial and religious groups, especially Catholics and Jews, and Southern whites, along with Northern blacks, where blacks had the right to vote. Some programs were eliminated in the 1940s as conservatives gained power in Congress with the Conservative Coalition. Particularly important was Social Security, which began in 1935